The following is an unpaid advertisement for the big picture. Tired of staring at bored faces? Is your classroom dull and dreary? Do you find yourself and your students counting the minutes to the bell? Well, then you need the big picture.
The big picture? What's that?
The Big Picture, Education is Everyone's Business is a book written by renowned educator and visionary Dennis Littke with Samantha Grabel. Dennis has spent decades reimagining schools and curriculum design to create a learning environment that motivates students to participate and succeed in and out of school. In his book, The Big Picture, Dennis will inspire you to make breakthroughs in your teaching that will turn your classroom from this to this.
Wow! But I've been using the same old curriculum for years. What you're saying sounds great, but it's also unfamiliar and different. That makes me a little uneasy. Where would I even start?
Well, that's easy. Start by reading The Big Picture and let Dennis Littke explain to you why these changes are exciting and essential.
Hi, I'm Julie Klotz, a graduate student in education at Brandman University, and I'm here to tell you why you need to read The Big Picture, written by Dennis Littke with Samantha Grabel. If you've been feeling intimidated or apprehensive about making shifts in your curriculum, this book will give you the motivation that you need. The Big Picture isn't a textbook, and it's not a step-by-step guide. It's a collection of wisdom and real-life examples that paint a colorful picture of how schools could be run, how curriculum could be approached, and how students could be treated, and most importantly, why. Dennis Littke's school, The Met, serves as the exemplary model for constructivist approaches. They look at the whole student. Students at the Met get to enjoy a personalized curriculum and a positive school culture that leads to them wanting to be in school and taking charge of their learning and growth. This book will truly show you the big picture when it comes to understanding by design and what it's really all about. Through his detailed accounts and success stories, Dennis will have you jumping out of your seat, ready to tackle those big changes. Just listen to these testimonials.
Before I read The Big Picture, I was teaching to the test. After each unit, my students would answer exam questions, mostly multiple choice, and they'd get an assessment grade based on how many they got right. Some kids got A's, some B's, some C's, and so on. And then we move on to the next. I mean, that's how it was done when I was in school. I didn't think twice about it. After reading The Big Picture, my view of assessments was completely flipped upside down. As I read, I realized that I was not looking at what my students were actually learning or understanding, just that they were able to repeat back what I'd poured into their minds. Give it a little time, and even the A students didn't really know what the purpose was of what they'd learned. That's if they even still remembered. What was I doing? These students were going to graduate and go off into the world with their A's and their C's or their F's and have no clue as to what that meant or how to apply anything they'd done in class. While I was reading The Big Picture, I realized that my A students would be completely unprepared to succeed in the real world, would just be blindsided by real challenges. Meanwhile, my F students would be more likely to give up, becoming another sad statistic. Since reading this book, I've changed everything about my assessments. And now I love my job, and my students love to learn and show their learning. At the Met, that's Dennis Littke's new school and the main character, if you will, of The Big Picture, students demonstrate their learning through exhibitions, portfolios, performance, etc. They get to show what they've learned as an individual and how they're meeting the learning goals in a way that is meaningful. They were also actually more rigorous than traditional testing, but the kids were succeeding. Now I make sure to set my learning outcomes. I know what I'm looking for, and my students can head toward these outcomes. When they understand their goals and they're engaged, they will take charge of their learning, and they'll set high standards for themselves. I make sure to give them feedback, just like the book talks about, just like in the real world. This helps them understand why they are getting a certain grade. And if a student isn't meeting their goals, they can use the feedback to help them grow. Now my assessments are actually measuring what my students understand and what they can do. Not only that, my students are actually learning from the assessments themselves. I feel so much better about how I'm preparing these kids. As Philip Gamage said, nobody ever grew taller by being measured. If you haven't read The Big Picture, you need to get your copy now. I was already using backwards design, but I was hitting some walls. I had the structure set up, but I wasn't making some important connections that would allow me to grow more in my practice. Well, reading The Big Picture gave me a huge jolt. Since reading the book, I've been able to integrate understanding and skills so much more effectively. Our students should not be learning through little self-contained packets of information. It's not natural. There's no relevance there. They can't carry these types of lessons with them, save for maybe an appearance on Jeopardy. Well, The Big Picture, through its passionate words and vivid examples, helped me gain more perspective on my curriculum design and really got my gears turning. I have so many ideas now for how to design well-rounded learning opportunities that are interesting, relevant, and applicable. My students can develop and use a variety of skills and knowledge in action, just like we do outside of school, by doing the things they care about. Well, I always knew that I was working with a diverse group of learners, but I couldn't grasp the idea of planning learning experiences that works for all students. I was so used to the formula I'd been using for years based on textbooks and things I find interesting. I always had students falling behind though, not remembering what I told them and not caring about my class. I heard that some educators were adhering to understanding by design, and that this emphasized engagement and the learning of skills and transfer of knowledge. It sounded great, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. It seemed so complex, and quite frankly, it made me uncomfortable. Well, then I read The Big Picture, Education is Everyone's Business, and it just clicked. Dennis Litkey shared so many examples from his experiences with students and educators at his groundbreaking school, the Met. The book had emphasized the importance of approaching schooling one kid at a time. Now, this may sound intimidating, but I now understand why this is so critical. When students get to incorporate their interests and their strengths to drive learning outcomes, they will take charge of their learning and they will enjoy school. This book made me realize that the way I was teaching my students was only preparing them to memorize facts. No wonder they were bored and struggling. I realized that making education work for each kid this way was actually more natural and easier than trying to force them all into the same box. As I plan their learning experiences now, I think of the 3 R's that they use at the Met: relationship, relevance, and rigor. It makes so much sense. I am so grateful for this eye-opening experience. Now my students are learning valuable skills. They're understanding concepts. They're meeting learning goals that are complex and purposeful. I give them room to grow at a pace that works for them because the goals are the goals. And it's okay if they don't know the answers to something on a specific Tuesday. If they need to keep trying to get closer to their goals and then they meet them, well, that's just as much of a win. These kids are learning how to think. And as they put it in the big picture, society is asking our graduates for skills and fast-paced communication. And schools are still giving them facts and one-way lectures. Well, change starts in our classrooms, in our schools. My classroom is a different place now, and other teachers at my school have followed suit. It is time for you to make change.
Wow, what amazing success stories. And all because of The Big Picture by Dennis Littke and Samantha Grabel. Before we go and I give you time to order your copy, I'd like to discuss something that's really just absolutely essential. One of the big ideas that courses through this book is that of teaching the whole student. You may have heard of the affective, behavioral, cognitive domains and the concept that we don't teach content, we teach people. This idea permeates every single aspect of the big picture. Our students are not empty vessels that we just pour knowledge into. They are whole humans, and what they learn today will shape who they become and the role that they'll play in this world. The big picture is not just a how-to for teaching content. This is a manifesto that emphasizes the gravity of seeing and approaching your students as individuals. While you read about real stories of Dennis's students, you'll feel a full range of emotions. You'll understand the immense difference that your approach to their learning can make. Listen, if you've ever found yourself looking back at a student who's struggling, a student who's at risk of dropping out, a student who's depressed, a student who's anxious, a student who's on drugs, a student involved in gangs, a student who is afraid to speak their mind, who doesn't want to get involved in school, is not interested, well, then you need to read The Big Picture. This book approaches the whole student from every angle and every aspect of curriculum. Your students deserve it, and the world deserves it. Pick up your copy today! What are you waiting for? The time for change is now. Now, now, now.